HISD will need a new superintendent. That's because Richard Carranza has accepted a new job in New York City.
The next Chancellor of the New York City Public Schools, Richard Carranza.
Chancellor Richard Carranza has served in a range of roles, including a high school social studies teacher, a music teacher, principal, superintendent, and now chancellor. His journey has taken him across the country, including Las Vegas, San Francisco, and Houston. Last April, he became Chancellor of New York City Schools, and on February 4th, we sat down with the Chancellor for an exclusive interview.
Hi, I'm Yasmin, a sophomore at Stuyvesant High School.
I'm Zoe, a junior at the High School of American Studies.
And I'm Taylor McGraw, co-founder of The Bell, which produces the Miseducation podcast.
We arrived at Tweed Courthouse, intimidated. Well, I was, by the building. The hub for New York City's Department of Education. We entered the building to be met with a tall ceiling and workers bustling about. We were then ushered downstairs, navigating through rooms filled with student projects. We arrived at a conference room, where we were instructed to wait for the Chancellor. I'm so scared. I've been scared the whole day.
But when he arrived, we couldn't afford to feel nervous anymore. No beating around the bush, as he was on a strict timeline.
He walks in, dressed in a light gray suit, a friendly smile, and ready with a firm handshake.
Hi, folks. How are you? Good. Thanks for coming out.
We asked him about a range of topics that students are concerned about and sourced questions from a variety of student advocacy groups.
We've condensed this interview for length and clarity. We'll provide a bit of commentary throughout and reflections at the end.
Here's the interview.
Chancellor, you've been in office for 9 months now. What is one thing that you've done that you're really proud of, and one thing that's been a bit tougher than you anticipated?
Yeah, so actually, this weekend I celebrated my 10th month in office. Not that I'm counting or anything, but I think, the proudest thing for me has been able to get out into the community, all 5 boroughs, listen to a lot of different people, parents, administrators, teachers, and especially students. I quote some of the things that I've heard from students everywhere I go. And I think that what I've been proud of is that I have been true to who I am and true to my experience as an educator. And I've been very unvarnished about some of the challenges we have in New York City, especially around race and equity and integration and segregation and the haves and have-nots. I've been pretty transparent, which has made some people really, really excited and some people really, really mad. But I'm really proud of that. I think one of the things that I didn't expect was, New York City always has this reputation of being very progressive, and I didn't expect the level of acceptance of the inequality that I have found in some corners of our city.
So Yasmin and I both go to specialized high schools. We've obviously heard a lot about changing the specialized high schools in the news. But what are your plans to integrate non-specialized high schools as well? Yeah,
so I think a lot of the atmosphere gets taken up with a conversation around specialized schools. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is that, they have a lot of alumni and there's a state law that requires a single test. So it's very high profile. But there is a lot of work that's happening kind of at the ground level around integrating our schools. I can point to 3 community districts as examples. One of them's District 3, District 1, and District 15. And in those districts, what they've done is had a community-based process where they've engaged the community. They've had conversations about segregation, integration. And we know that District 3 just, on my watch, I got to sign off on their integration plan. District 15 went even a little further by, eliminating some of the quotas and the screens. They are just the tip of the iceberg. There are at least 8 other community districts in New York City that are also now starting to mobilize their conversations in their districts. So there's a lot of that work that's being done. We also are supporting districts in doing that. When I signed the approval and the mayor signed approval on District 15's integration plan, we also announced a $2 million grant process so that other community districts could do the same kind of an engagement process.
We just want to note that Carranza is talking about integration within community school districts, which only govern K-8 schools. And while that progress is encouraging, he did not address the question about segregation in high schools, which are not zoned.
Many top-performing high schools have strict admissions criteria, or screens, that help maintain segregation.
You have been quoted saying, why are we screening students? I don't get that. So we're going to ask you the same questions. Why do we screen students?
Yeah, I don't get that. So I think that, the other part of the quote that often doesn't get reported is that if you are going to have a screen, you have to be very, very thoughtful and very, very careful about what the purpose of the screen is for. So let me give you an example. If you have a performing arts high school, like LaGuardia, like Sinatra, and you have an audition process, by the very fact that you have an audition process, you're screening. But there's a very specific purpose for that school. Students want to go there who have a sole focus on the performing arts. So a screen or audition process makes sense as long as it's fair, as long as it's open, as long as kids have access to that. But when you're talking about a school that's a specialized school, which, is a school that by definition is for students that have an academic focus, a hyper academic focus, then you also have to make sure that they're open, they're fair, and that you're not excluding students either by omission, which means you're not giving all students the opportunity to understand how that screening works, or commission, you're purposely using strategies and systems that will filter out some students for the opportunity to go to those schools. In the general sense, public education should be open to all students because all taxpayers pay for public education. So whenever you have a screen, that's why you have to be very, very careful about all of the things that I've talked about. I just happen to think that the screens that exist in New York City, in our traditional public schools, don't meet that threshold in many cases.
So you mentioned how you've publicly condemned the segregation in the system and how you've spoken publicly about reforming the SHSAT.
The SHSAT, or the Specialized High School Admissions Test, is an exam that determines entry to the city's 8 specialized high schools.
But why haven't you been more vocal in advocating for the state legislation specifically that's required to do that?
Well, actually, I'll disagree just a little bit. We have been. And a lot of what happens in Albany. I've been having lots of conversations with congressional representatives, with state representatives, both in the Assembly and in the Senate, local city council people, CEC leaders, Community Education Council leaders. I mean, anybody and everybody, when I've met with them, we don't shy away from the conversation around the admissions process to the specialized schools. Even opposition groups that have been opposed to the mayor and my proposal for reforming that, we've had conversations. We have a team from the Department of Education that is going to every single community education council and having an evening where we talk about the proposal and then, listen to the community. And I can tell you that in some communities, there's been some very enlightened conversations. In other communities, it's been downright ugly. It's been ugly. And one of the things that I've also been, very, very forthright about is that there are 165 specialized schools in the country. And of the 165 specialized schools across the country, there are only 8 specialized schools that use a single test as the sole criteria for admission to a specialized school. And guess where all 8 of those schools are? They're in New York City. So either the rest of the country is way behind us, or we figured out something that they don't know, or maybe perhaps it's time for us to re-examine the processes by which we allow students the opportunity to go to a specialized school in a public school system that we control. Now, I'm going to add one other piece to this answer. Part of why I am so opposed, and by the way, folks have tried to say, I gotcha. Because my oldest daughter, went to a specialized school in San Francisco when I lived in San Francisco. Yes, she did. She didn't take a single test. Her state scores in English language arts and math counted. Her grades counted. There was an essay she had to write because she wanted to go to that school. There were multiple factors that went into painting a picture of who she was, not just one test. But I will tell you, here's another problem I have with the specialized admissions test. It is neither valid nor reliable. There is not one psychometrician that has has given an analysis that it's valid or reliable as a single criteria to identify talent for a student to go to a specialized school. So what does that mean? That means that we as a system, as a community, have sold a bill of goods to our middle school students and parents, because we tell middle school students and parents, you need to go to school every day, you need to do well in your English class, your math class, your science class, your social studies class, get involved in an extracurricular activity, play a sport, be part of a club, do well, don't miss school. Yet everything they do that I just talked about really doesn't matter if they want to go to a specialized school, because all they have to do is take the specialized high school admissions test, which is not aligned to the state standards, which is what everybody's studying in school. It's not aligned to the state standards. It's not valid. It's not reliable. All you have to do is show up on one day for 2 hours and do okay, or at least in okay enough to get a certain score. And then you have an opportunity to go to a specialized school. So that can't be the message. If it's important to go to middle school, then you should do well in middle school. That should count for something if you want an opportunity to go to specialized school. So there's a disconnect between what the system says you need to do and then what we require parents and kids to do. Don't get me started about the cottage industry that has sprouted up about tutoring kids for the specialized school. People are making lots of money on the backs of our students, our immigrant students, our poor families. I'm just not okay with that. All of that goes into why it needs to change.
So could you give us a timeline on when you see change happening?
Well, the legislature is in session right now. Tomorrow morning, I'm heading to Albany. I'll be there for 2 days testifying on budget and all kinds of other things. I'm meeting with legislators. I guarantee you that this topic is going to come up in my conversations with many, many legislators. So the timeline is now. The urgency of equity is right now. And with our meetings that we're having with our community education councils, all of the other conversations that we're having, I mean, we're working on this right now.
Last year, we did an episode on sports disparities. We wanted to follow up to see what's happened. If you want to know more about that issue, check out episode 3. You've talked a lot about sports equity, especially at a recent town hall in the Bronx, and you've declared that creating more PSIL teams and creating equity in that field is a priority. So what are your next steps in addressing this issue?
Well, we have not stopped working about this. One of the things that I think is really important for people to understand is that, you know, I get Twitter trolls all the time. And people will like tweet stuff at me and they want me to have Twitter arguments. I just don't do that. I don't spend my time doing that. I spend my time doing the work. So while I might not respond to all of the Twitter posts and people want to know this and that on Twitter, we're doing the work. And I can tell you that in the very near future, there will be some announcements made that will go towards PSAL equity and equity of sports. I can also tell you that in the budget requests that we've put in with the city, there is requests that have been submitted that have to do with being able to fund an expansion of PSAL activities as well. A lot gets made about the lawsuit, and again, I'm not scared about lawsuits because I know we're going to do the right thing. So that notwithstanding, it's just for us, for myself, for my cabinet, which are my senior leaders, and especially for my deputy chancellor, my colleague, LaShawn Robinson, who now has responsibility for the oversight of the PSAL. I can tell you that it's absolutely unacceptable, the current state of affairs around equity for sports opportunity for students. Even on Twitter, where people will post all of these statistics. Did you know that there is a lack of sports for these kinds of kids and there's an overabundance of sports for these kinds of kids? Yes, I know. Yes. And if there's anything that keeps me up at night, it's that. So of course we know that, and we're working diligently to get the resources, to get the plan together, to address that and start to fix this once and for all. So stay tuned. Pretty soon, lots of students are going to have games to go to, and lots of parents are going to have games to go watch.
Can I ask what you mean by pretty soon?
Sooner rather than later. hate to be so cryptic. It's just, I don't want to get out ahead of some of those. We're working in multiple areas, and I don't want to get ahead of those people and those systems and those processes. So again, it is absolutely at the top of our list. We're actively working, and as soon as we can have an announcement, believe me, we'll reach out to you. You'll know.
Well, it's been known that Black students in New York City make up nearly 26% of the student population, but account for nearly half of the student suspensions. So our question is, how do you plan to address the issue of racial disparities within the context of student disciplinary action?
Yeah, so it's another, if anything keeps me up, it's the PSAL and the disparity, the disproportionality. Look, let me just be honest. It's also really, really unacceptable to me that if you're a Black male student in elementary school, you're 4 times more likely to be suspended than your peers. If you're a Black student in the high school system, you're more likely to get additional days of suspension for the very same infraction than your peer group. That's just unacceptable. Now, there are several ways that you can address this issue. I, as a chancellor, could issue an edict, could issue a rule that says you will not suspend Black students, Latino students. You just will not suspend them beyond so many days. I could do that. But let me tell you what's going to happen, because I've been a teacher, I've been a principal, I've lived and worked in 4 different states, now 5 different systems. Let me tell you what would happen if we did that. What would happen if you do that without giving teachers a different way of addressing behavior in classrooms? If you do that without taking teachers and administrators and school personnel through restorative practice training, take them through implicit bias training so that they recognize their own biases. If you don't get adults to examine why they're making decisions and why they think kids are the way they are, if you don't get them to be able to do that analysis, then you can issue whatever rule you want. The adults will find a way to still do what they do, regardless of your rule. So what we're doing is we're investing in exactly what I talked about. We're training everybody in the Department of Education around implicit bias training so they can recognize their biases. We're investing more resources, over $24 million in additional resources in training personnel around restorative practices, positive classroom behavior supports. We're starting at the earliest grades of giving schools and teachers and principals and students funding to be able to be trained on positive behavioral supports. One of the things that I see when I go to schools now is the ruler, right? Where students get to look at what is their emotional situation for the day, how do they deal with their different emotions, etc. We're also investing in trauma-informed instruction. There are many places in our city, because we're a big, large city, where just the mere fact of living in an urban city, living in communities, is a traumatic experience. Getting to school, getting home from school, what happens on the weekends. So adults in our school system have to know how to recognize those signs of trauma. And instead of saying, you're being disobedient, we're going to suspend you, instead say, hey, what's going on? What do you need? How can I help? It's a different way of working with students. So it's my very long-winded way of saying that, yes, we're looking at limiting those days, but at the same time that we're looking at how do you limit those days of suspension, how do you limit those punitive disciplinary actions, how do we train people to have different ways of being able to deal with that are much more restorative rather than punitive. They have to go hand in hand.
So specifically you talked about including student voice in policy discussions, and we know that you hired a student voice manager. And what other steps are you taking to ensure that students get a voice?
Well, I'm really excited about a student voice manager. We have applicants that have applied. We're going through the qualifications. What I'm really excited about is that students are going to sit on the interview panels. They're going to interview with students, which I think is really good. I know that we've, in our interview processes for not only principals, but now central office administrators, to the greatest extent possible, we're including student representation on those interview panels as well. So we want students to have a voice at the table. The second thing that I think I'm really, really excited about is the fact that I have advisory groups of students. I have one in food. I have one for just general Chancellor's advisory group. And those are great groups to have. And I want to encourage students to be part of that. But one of the things that I think is really incredibly important is that I reorganized the department in this past summer. And what I did is create 9 executive superintendents. And the reason that's important is that if you think of me flying at, the 50,000 foot level, I have responsibility for the entire city. There's only so much that I know, but because I'm so far away from the schools, there's a lot that I don't know what's happening. So with these 9 executive superintendents that are embedded in the boroughs, they know what's happening in their boroughs, and the executive superintendents all have student advisory groups advising them about what's happening in their schools. I think that's incredibly important. The next level down, you have community superintendents in each one of those community school districts. And then we have high school superintendents. They have student representatives of the schools that are in their area. All of that sends a loud message to folks that it's important that student voices be heard and they be listened to.
We're looking forward to see how Carranza's new structure plays out, but we're not entirely sure yet on how it's going to better represent student voices.
The other thing that I'll say about this is, look, I still remember a month or so back where on the very same night that we were having one of those horrific Community Education Council presentations on the specialized school proposal. And my colleagues from the Department of Education were getting yelled at.
These schools have given opportunities to children of working class, children of middle class, children of immigrants for generations.
There were parents or community members at that meeting that were saying some horrific things about Black and brown kids and their ability to be applicants at specialized schools. On the very same night, there was a student panel and a student event where students were talking from a completely different perspective and had a completely different message than what the adults were saying across town.
Carranza is referring to Teens Take Charge, another one of the Bell's programs that brings together a coalition of students from across New York City to advocate for educational equity.
Dear New York City public school system, give all students a chance.
That's the power of student voice. You are first person witnesses and participants in history. And the ability to give students the voice, the platform, I don't give you the voice, I give you the platform to express your voice is incredibly important. And it changes conversations by ways that people can't even imagine. I totally believe that had the student panel been part of that Community Education Council meeting, the adults that said the things that they said would probably not have said them, because how could they say that in front of first-person witnesses to what their experiences are in schools? So I think it's just important. I think it's something that we will continue to do and will continue to amplify.
Is there anything you'd like to say now to the students while they're listening?
Yeah, to our students, look, I want you to be incredibly proud that you're a part of the New York City Public Schools, New York City Department of Education. I can't tell you, and I have the opportunity because of my role to interact with a lot of people, titans of industry, CEOs, movie stars, certain rappers by the name of Cardi B, people like that who proudly say, I'm a graduate of the New York City Public Schools. I want you to be proud that you're part of the New York City Public Schools. But more than that, I want you to understand that we're listening to you, that the schools belong to you, and that you will see as we continue to do our work that there are going to be more and more opportunities for you to have your voice heard at the table, and that there are more and more opportunities for you to join with like-minded organizations that are out in the community where student voice is lifted, and we give a place for that at the decision-making table. So I just want students to be safe, make good choices, make healthy choices, but also remember that you're not alone, that when you come to school, We chose to go into education regardless of what we do, whether it's to serve the food in the cafeteria, clean the school while you're there, lead the school, or teach in a classroom. We made the decision to be educators and work in education because at the very heart of what we do, we love students. And we want to empower students to be better and better and better and better than what we had. So just remember that. You're not alone. We value your voice. And I couldn't be more proud to be the Chancellor of the New York City Public Schools, hearing your voice.
Yasmin, Zoe, how do you think the interview went?
It went better than I expected, but I also had really, really low standards because I was so nervous the entire time.
I would have liked to hear more about timeline, and I don't doubt that the Chancellor wants these policies to be implemented, and I don't doubt that he's pushing for it, but I think we need to see some change coming soon.
He definitely seems to care about student voices, and he appreciated what we were doing, which is nice. He didn't think we were annoying or whatever, which is what I was worried about.
He seemed like a really nice guy.
He seemed like the type of guy you'd like to have, like, drinks with. Not that I could drink, but, like, if I could, then yeah.
Before we go, Zoe, you've got to tell the listeners the story about Yasmin's confusion after the interview.
We were recounting what had happened in the interview outside, and Yasmin was talking about how she thought he had been bragging about his salary. And it's like, Yasmin, sorry to tell you this. I don't think so.
Okay, hold on. Let's back up a little bit. First, tell them the question.
As we were wrapping up, we asked about the differences he felt from becoming Chancellor to who he was previously, as in not as well known.
That is a great question. I've never been asked that question, by the way. So for me, it feels a little surreal, okay? Because I'm just Richard.
So we all heard Carranza say, "I'm just Richard," which is his first name. But Yasmin, what did you hear?
I still listening back, I still don't hear the D. So it still sounds like he said, "I'm just Richard." So I thought he was talking about that the only difference with him previously and him now, which is that he made more money, which is true. Weird thing to bring up. He didn't say that though. He's not he doesn't seem like the type of guy to flaunt his salary.
Right now, we're gearing up for a new season with a new team of interns. We have lots in store for you this spring and encourage you to subscribe wherever you get podcasts.
Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Miseducationpod. Send feedback and story ideas to miseducationpod@gmail.com.
The Miseducation Podcast is a program of The Bell, elevating student voices in the education conversation. This podcast is produced in partnership with the Hechinger Report with support from the Pinkerton Foundation. Thanks also to FJC, a foundation of philanthropic funds.
We'll be back soon. Thanks for listening.